I left the old man behind. I left the old man buried when I came up from the water. I'd been crucified. I left the old for the new. Now I am cleansed, my strength renewed, to live for Jesus all of my days. And that is why I left it all behind.
I was born in Chickamauga, Georgia, a small town, of course, sort of at the foot of Lookout Mountain. My religious journey began in December of 1938, just before my 10th birthday. We moved out on top of Lookout Mountain, just out from Cloudland, Georgia, and I had my 10th birthday in 1939. There was a church building out there on the mountain that they were not having services in. It was United Methodist Church, and MT.OLIVE was the name of that church. And my dad wanted to start a Sunday school class there, although he was a member of the Baptist Church, but it didn't seem to make any difference to him. So he checked with the proper individuals to see if he could do that, since they were not having services there at all. And so they permitted him to begin having services there, Bible studies. And at that time, by attending that group, I became interested in religion. Although I was young, I had my 10th birthday, 1939, and so while we was there, I began to ask a lot of questions about the church and different religious viewpoints. And the latter part of the year, I went out into the woods and gathered pine knots because my dad was making plans to go to Chattanooga. And I wanted to go up there and sell some of the kindling and have some money to buy a BB gun with. So on our way up there to Chattanooga, well, I began to, as we passed by the different church buildings, I was asking questions. What does this group believe and teach? I knew there was a difference because I'd heard the Methodist preacher that finally came down, a man by the name of Tally Crane from Lafayette, was coming into that United Methodist Church and before the summer months, and was over and was teaching, and he was teaching baptism by immersion. He was also teaching baptism by sprinkling, and my dad would say that baptism is a burial. He was a Baptist, of course, and they believed that. So on our way to Chattanooga that day, I was asking questions to my dad. What does this group believe? And to the best of his ability, he was telling me what they believed and all. And then he was telling me what the Baptist Church believed, because that's what he was a member of. And he made it very clear to me that the Baptist Church is really the Bible church. He even made the statement that John was a Baptist, and he baptized Christ, and that made a Baptist out of Christ. And so me being 10 years old, I thought, well, that sounds logical, because I knew about John the Baptist, and I knew, that we had heard a lot talked about him and preaching and everything. So I thought that made it right, and I thought these other churches, all of them, had to be wrong. I couldn't understand why he told me, he said, they all get their teaching from the Bible. And I just could not understand how any person could, people could, or any book could be relied on if it taught so many different things. And that bothered me, to think that the different religions was like that, and why they couldn't all just be one group and be a part of the Baptist Church, of course. But in later years, I learned better than that. I learned that the church that you read about in the Bible was not the Baptist Church, that it was started by a man by the name of Smith or Smythe in Holland. And so 1940, we moved off the mountain down to Menlo, Georgia. And so I then began to attend the services there at the Baptist Church in Menlo. I had received my license to drive an automobile, and my dad had an old 30 Chevrolet car, even though he was not at home at the time, because I had brothers that were in the armed force. Had 4 brothers in the armed force, and one of which was out in the South Pacific in the Navy during World War II. So my dad went up to Chattanooga because one of my brothers was owner of a dry cleaning plant up there on Ringo Road, the sanitary cleaners. You may have seen that up there, and it's still there, as a matter of fact. And so he went to work there, and so I was the man of the house now at home. And my mother got well, she could play the piano, and the Dry Valley Baptist Church was going to have what they called a revival. And they invited her to come over and play the piano for them, so she didn't have a way to get there. And I could now drive, so I would drive her over there. So the man that was holding the meeting there, his name was T. Perry Brannon. He was from Chattanooga, Tennessee. And so one night during the meeting, when he extended the invitation, he came back to me and he said, "Son, are you a Christian?" And I said, "No, I'm not." He said, "Well, all you've got to do to be a Christian is just believe that Jesus is the Christ." He said, "That's all you've got to do." But he turned and walked off, went back to the front of the building, and I thought about what he said, and I thought, well, I must be a Christian then, because I believe that Jesus is the Christ. So I just left my pew and I walked down to the front of the building where there was a man standing there, and he said, "Could I do something for you?" And I said, "Well," I said, "the preacher came back there where I was standing, and he asked me if I was a Christian, and I told him I was not. And he said that all you've got to do to be a Christian is to believe that Jesus is the Christ." And I said, "Well, I believe that Jesus is the Christ," so I said, "I must be a Christian." So I stood there. There were several people that had moved down to the front and had bowed in front of the pulpit on their knees, seeking salvation evidently. And so at a period of time, they all got up, and they were asked to make a statement as to what the Lord had done for them. And they stated that they believed that Christ had saved them. So then they got to me, and the man asked me, said, "Do you have anything to say?" And I said, "Yes, I do." I said, "The preacher came back there where I was a while ago standing, and he asked me if I was a Christian. I told him I was not. And he said, 'Well, all you've got to do to be a Christian is believe.' And I said, 'Well, I believe that Jesus is the Christ, so I believe that I'm a Christian then.' And so they accepted that. And the next morning she said to me, she said, "Tommy," she says, "I'm glad that you got saved." She says, "Now you need to join the church and be baptized." I said, "Well, Mama, can I go to heaven without doing that?" And she said, "Well, yes, you can, but you want to join the church and be baptized." I said, "Well, why?" She said, "Because you want to work for the Lord, don't you?" And I said, "Well, can't I work for the Lord like I am without joining the church and being baptized?" And she said, "Oh, well," said, "Yeah, you can, but said, you can do a better job if you join the church and be baptized." I said, "Well, Mama, I don't want to do anything that I don't have to do. If it's not necessary for me to join the church and be baptized, well, I'm just going to stay like I am, because I don't see any use of becoming a member of the Baptist church and being baptized if I don't have to do it. I want to go to heaven, but if I can go like this, well, then that's the way I'm going to do." So in 1947, I met my wife. Her name was Dewayne Smith, and I met her, and we began to date, and in the process of time, we were both working at Regal Textile in Tryon, just a short distance from here. And so in process of time, well, we got married, and she did not profess to be a Christian at all. And we were attending the Perennial Springs Baptist Church, which of course is not very far from here. And so at some point in time during that year, well, they had a meeting there. They called it Revival. Oliver Pledger was the preacher. And so he was, of course, trying to get people to become Christians, he said. He would extend the invitation. So when he did extend the invitation, he told of a woman that had a daughter that had gone and left home. And she, this daughter was really kind of living a rough life and going to the dance halls and beer joints and places like that, the mother thought. So she had a picture of the daughter, and she told the preacher, said, according to what Oliver Pledger was telling, said, I want you to take this picture and put it in the beer joints and dance halls and places where I think that my daughter might attend, and put the words over that, come home. And so Oliver Pledger walked up and down the aisle saying, come home, come home. And so my wife went down to the front of the building, bowed down on her knees in prayer in front of the pulpit. And at that time, she made a confession that she felt that God had saved her, that she was now a Christian. And so we went forward and wanted to join the Baptist Church by being baptized. And so they voted on us by raising their hands. He asked if everybody was in favor of baptizing us, that to join the church. Well, they raise your hand. And then he asked if anybody opposed to raise their hand. So there was people that raised their hand for us to join the church, but there was none that refused. So now then the date is set for us to be baptized. So we were going to go, I believe they said, the best I remember, the third Sunday at 2:30 at the Barrington Creek. And so we were there for that occasion and was baptized. And after we were baptized, well, met back at the building. They gave us the right hand of church fellowship. Up to that point, we was not members of the Baptist Church. We claimed that we were Christians, of course, but we were not members of the church. And my brother was another brother of mine was working at the Peerless Woolen Mill in Rossville. And so I contacted him to see if he could help to get me a job there, and he got me a job. And I went there and stayed with them for a short period of time. And during that period of time, I then later began to stay with my aunt, my dad's sister rather, and Tom Crane, she had was married to him, and I was staying with them. And Billy Crane, first cousin of mine, and he and I were very good friends and all of our lives. And so he had begun to preach in the Baptist Church at different places. So I was well impressed with the fact that he was preaching, and so we visited back down to the Perennial Springs. We'd go as often as we could down there to services, and so they invited me one Sunday if I would preach down there. And they pretty well told me that all you got to do if you want to preach is just open your mouth and God would fill it. So I got up there without having prepared that much for the occasion, and I got up and I began to try to preach, and to tell you the truth, I didn't do too good. I wasn't pleased at all. So after this period of time, my wife and Terry and myself moved down to Lafayette, and we became members of the Second Baptist Church in Lafayette, Georgia. And so while there, a preacher there, his name was Dennis Hanna, he invited me on one Wednesday night to speak for them. And so I really put myself into it, preparing and studied real hard. And so my topic that I was going to use was, be sure your sins will find you out. And so I brought the lesson for that group that night, and I was somewhat pleased. The people came around and shook my hand, said, you did good. And that, of course, encouraged me, a young man. I thought, well, you know, I kind of enjoyed that, and I've decided now that I think I want to be a preacher. So Billy Crane, by this time had accepted an invitation to come down to the Spring Creek Baptist Church and preach for them. And so in the process of time, where my wife and myself and Terry, we moved back to the Somerville area. And so we identified ourselves with the Spring Creek Baptist Church where Bill Crane was preaching, and I was taking every opportunity in the county to preach at different places in this area. And so not long after I had identified myself with the Spring Creek Baptist Church, I was licensed to preach. And so along about this same period of time, my daughter Yvonne was born. And so one Sunday evening, Bill Crane extended the invitation, and this was the way that he worded it. He said, if you want to get closer to the Lord, so just come down, let's all get on our knees and pray that we might get closer to the Lord. So I went forward and got down on my knees, and I think just about all the people at Spring Creek did so. And we was down there praying, and so my prayer was this: Lord, I want to be close to you, but I just don't know how. I want you to help me, that you'll help me to become close to you. And so my prayer ended like that. And I went on, and I had to work that night. That was on a Sunday night. I had to work. I was working the third shift at Regal Textile. So I got off from work at 8 o'clock that next morning and got in my car and was driving down the 27 highway, coming back from Tryon back to Somerville. And I turned my radio on, and I heard the announcer of WGTA make this announcement about the gospel broadcast that was going to be presented. And says the Churches of Christ is program, and the speaker is Cecil Williams, and these will be the speaker's views and not necessarily those of this station. Claimed that the Church of Christ made a profession that we speak where the Bible speaks and are silent where the Bible is silent. Well, I'd never heard anything just like that before, and so I listened to this man carefully, what he was saying. And he says, you can't find the Baptist church in the Bible, nowhere. He said, you can't find the Methodist church or the Presbyterian, and he called over a number of groups, and he said, you just cannot find that in the Bible. He says, I have an automobile. If somebody will come forward and show me their church, the Baptist church or Methodist church or Presbyterian, in the Bible, he said, I'll give them my car. Well, I thought that was kind of a challenge. And I thought, well, I'm going to go and see that man, because I believe since my dad told me that John was a Baptist, he baptized Christ and made a Baptist out of him, I think I've got grounds to face this man. So I went down, met him here at this building where we're located right now on the outside. And so he came over and got in my car, and I said, I want to talk to you. And so he said, all right. He said, what about? And I said, well, you claim that the Church of Christ is right. And I said, and I began to tell him about the Baptist church, you know. And I felt like that he was kind of persecuting the Baptist church. And he sat there and listened to me for 30 minutes and didn't interfere at all, just sat and listened to everything that I said. So when I got through, I was ready to go home. He said, Joel, Mr. Broome, he said, don't you think that it'd be fair for you to listen to me now for the next 30 minutes? He said, I gave you 30 minutes and I didn't interrupt you. He said, don't you think it'd be fair for you to hear me out? And I said, well, yeah, I guess so. And so he started, and he took everything that I said. I want you to know he evidently memorized every word, and he just actually tore it apart. And when he got through talking and all, well, I knew that he had really said some things that straightened me out, because I didn't know this, you know. And so I didn't admit this to him, that I felt like that he did teach me something that I had not known earlier. And it began to announce that they were going to have debates in the courthouse here. And he was going to debate a Church of God preacher. I believe the Church of God preacher's name was Bates or Batts. I'm not sure of the name exactly. And so I went to hear the debates every night, because I was working the third shift and I could do that. And so I will tell you this, that this Church of God preacher was very intelligent, and he knew his Bible well. And Cecil Williams, because this man had challenged Cecil Williams to the debate, so he went first. He presented the argument, and about the doctrine of saved, sanctified, and filled with the Holy Ghost, I believe was the topic that they used, and things of such nature. And so I thought, well, Cecil Williams is not going to be able to answer that man's argument. But I sat and listened carefully to both, and he did. When he came on, Cecil Williams was very strong. This man believed in speaking in tongues, and they used instruments of music in the worship and things like that. And Cecil Williams just took the Bible and actually just refuted what this man was teaching right down the line. And I could see it. I could understand it. And I continued to listen, and I went to all the debates, and I listened to him on the radio program. And there was also a man in Tryon that was preaching. His name was A.C. Grider. And he came on at a different time during the day, and I was listening to him. And there's quite a discussion on the radio. They were allowed to call names on the radio, and that was taking place. And there was a man by the name of G. Carl Green that came into the area. And so he was arguing the point that Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. And he was taking the stand that a person is saved by faith only, and that Abraham was justified by faith only. So, of course, A.C. Grider was able to refute what this man said, and I could see it very clearly, because he'd go over into the book of James and show that we're not justified by faith only. My wife and I went out on Lookout Mountain to see if we could find a place. I'm not sure whether or not I had heard that there was a place out there or not, but when we got out near Mentone, Alabama, we saw a sign on the side of the road there that said Cove Road Baptist Church, and it was down a little old dirt road. And so I went down that road and found the Cove Road Baptist Church building, and it was growed up around the building. Had weeds looked like about 2 feet tall, I guess. And so I told my wife, I said, I don't believe they're having any services here at all. So I looked around in the area and saw a house a little ways off, maybe a quarter of a mile from there. And so we got in my car and we drove down there and drove in the driveway. And I went up to the door and knocked on the door. A man came to the door, and I introduced myself to him. And he told me his name was Dolph Johnson. And I told him that my reason for being out there was that I was looking for a place to preach, and that I was licensed in the Baptist church to preach, and that the building up there looked like it was not being used. And Dolph Johnson informed me that they had not had services there in a long time because they could not get a preacher. So I said, well, I'm available, and I'd be glad to come out here and preach for you all. And he said, well, I'm not sure that we could get anybody to attend. I said, my wife and I will go out and knock doors and see if we can find people that will come. So we did. And so I began to preach at the Cove Road Baptist Church. So to begin with, we was having a very small attendance. I'm not real sure just offhand how many, maybe 10. people was there. And there was a lady that could play the piano, and so we had somebody that led the singing, and I would bring the lessons, and I did my very best, even though I believed what I was hearing on the radio that Cecil Williams and A.C. Grider was teaching. I was believing what they were teaching to be the truth, and so I was having a problem actually coming up with material that would suit the Baptist individuals for preaching, because I did not believe in the doctrine of once saved, always saved. I did not believe in joining the church of your choice. I did not believe in instruments of music. I believed the Lord's Supper was to be observed every first day of the week, and here I am in the Baptist church trying to preach Baptist doctrine, and I'm having a complete hard time to find anything that would justify what I was trying to do. So one Sunday morning, while preaching there, I just got tired of the whole thing, and I preached my convictions, right straight forward. I said, you don't find the Baptist church in the Bible nowhere. I said, you don't find in the Bible where you take the Lord's Supper monthly, quarterly, or annually. The early Christians came together upon the first day of the week to break bread, Acts 20 and verse 7. You don't find in the Bible where they used any instruments of music. The Bible tells us in Colossians 3:16, Ephesians 5:19, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. And I said, I don't find in the Bible where anybody ever joined the church. I said, the people that became Christians in the Bible, the Lord added them to His church. And the church that He added to had to be His church and not some man-made organization, because Jesus said, upon this rock I will build my church, and that's ownership. I said, Christ said it's my church, and I said, I don't think we have a right to establish man-made churches and all. I kind of backed out over the process of time and began to soften up a little bit. And so they decided they wanted to ordain me for their preacher, because they had not, they were not in the Baptist Association. So they made contact with Spring Creek Baptist Church to see whether or not they would ordain me. And so, well, they were notified that they would ordain me to be a Baptist, what they call pastor. So Bill Crane met with me and gave me the Hiscox manual to study. He wanted me to memorize the 18 Articles of Faith. And so I took that manual and began to study it with the intent of trying to, well, take the Bible and take that and see if I couldn't match it to what the Bible says, but I couldn't find any of those things that was taught in that Baptist manual. I could not find that in the Bible. So I went to Billy Crane, and I said, Billy, I've taken this Hiscox manual and I've studied that, but I can't find any of the 18 Articles of Faith in the Bible. And he says, they're not in the Bible. Said they were taken from the Bible, though. Well, I didn't understand how that could ever happen if they're not in the Bible, how you could ever take anything from the Bible. But I sort of kept quiet. And so the process of time, we met at the church building at Spring Creek, and the building was full. I sat in on the front row, and well, someone was playing the piano, a first cousin of mine. Another first cousin was blowing a trumpet, I think. And I was thinking, because the presbytery had met in one of the classrooms back there, a bunch of preachers and deacons had. And so I thought, well, if I let this ordination go on, I'll never get out of the Baptist church, and I've got to get out of the Baptist church. And so I just got up, and I went back to that classroom, and I knocked on the door. And a man came to the door, and he said, what could I do for you? And I said, well, I've got to talk to the men back here. I said, I've got to see it, and because I don't believe like the Baptist church believes. And so he went back in the room and told them that I was out there and that I wanted to come in and talk to them. And so they invited me to come in. And I got in there, and they said, Tommy, what's your trouble? I said, well, I don't believe like the Baptist Church believes, and so I can't be ordained. I just don't think that I can allow it to happen. And they said, well, what is the difference? What is it that you believe that's different to what we believe? And I said, well, to start with, I said, I don't believe the Baptist Church is a Bible church. I said, you can't read about the Bible in the Bible about the Baptist Church. And I said, the doctrine that you teach, I said, you teach the doctrine of once saved, always saved. You teach that people are saved by faith only. I said, you have instruments of music in the worship. And I said, I cannot find any of this in the Bible. The Bible does not justify that kind of teaching. And so I said, the Bible teaches that the disciples came together upon the first day of the week. But I said, you all have the Lord's Supper monthly, quarterly, or annually, and you teach that. And one man said, he's a Carmelite. And so, well, I, of course, didn't let that bother me because I've been called a whole lot of things since I've been a Christian. But they asked me, said, Tommy, would you meet with us at Dalton Monday? That was on a Sunday afternoon. And I said, well, I'll be glad to. I said, we'll discuss these things. I said, yes, I'll be glad to discuss them with you if that's what you want to do. So on Monday at the set time, at the set place, well, I met with them in a house, and they had both men and women there, and the room that we met in was just crowded. And so the men got together and they went on the outside and left me inside the room with all those women. And so one of the ladies spoke up and says, Tommy Broome, said, if you believe that you've got to be baptized in order to be saved, said, you don't believe in the blood of Christ. And so when she got through with that, I was going to defend what I believed and taught on the subject, but I didn't have an opportunity because everybody began to speak at the same time. And I got a thrashing like you wouldn't believe, and this lasted for about 30 minutes. And then the men came back in the room where I was, that had been on the outside. They had been out there discussing what to do, I suppose. And so one of the men said to me, said, Tommy, said, we've decided what we are going to do. Said, we're going to withdraw fellowship from you. Said, we're turning you out of the Baptist Church. Of course, I asked him questions. I knew what it was all about, but I asked him, I said, well, what's it all about? And he said, well, you don't teach what the Bible teaches. And said, we're turning you out because of that. And of course, I knew better than that. I knew that I do teach what the Bible taught as far as that was concerned. So they said, we're turning you out of the Baptist Church, and said, you've been licensed to preach in the Baptist Church, and says, we want your license back. I said, no. I said, you're not going to get those licenses. I said, they were given to me, and I'm going to keep them. And so I kept the license, and in process of time, I met with, after this was over, I was on the square in Tryon in front of the big store there, the company store, the Regal store. And one of the Baptist preachers of the area that I knew met me there, and he walked up to me and he says, Tommy, he says, I don't like what I hear that has happened to you. And he said, I've known your mother and dad for many years. He says, I've always liked them, and said, I've always liked you. He said, we're having a prayer meeting Friday night at the Waterville Baptist Church. So I met with them at the Waterville Baptist Church for that prayer meeting that night, and he introduced me as having known me for many years and made a lot of comments about the family and all. And so then he turned it over to me, and my topic that night was why we don't have a revival today like they had in Acts 2. And I used the second chapter of the book of Acts, starting with verse 1, and I read and commented as I was talking on each verse throughout the whole chapter of the second chapter of Acts. And I don't know how long I was up talking to the people, possibly 30 or 40 minutes, but when I extended the invitation, there were 7 women came forward. And I hadn't thought of that. I didn't hardly know what to do. I didn't expect, I thought they'd hate me, really. for teaching a lesson like that, because I taught that baptism is for the remission of sins while I was teaching that. And I taught the principles that you've got to be a part of the Lord's church. And so I didn't figure that anybody would respond, and so I didn't know what to do, so I just went over and sat down and let the preacher take care of it. But after giving second thought to what I should have done, I should have walked over to those ladies and said, "Why tarriest thou? Arise and be baptized and wash away thy sins, calling on the name of the Lord." Of course, that's afterthoughts, after I had time to think a while. Well, they got up from there, and I don't remember what their comments was or anything, but anyway, I got out of there as quickly as I possibly could. After that period of time, it was a good while before I obeyed the gospel. My wife was not a member of the church, and I would discuss the Bible with her. I started out discussing the Bible with her, and it didn't set too well. It was an argument, to tell you the truth, because she was a Baptist, and she said, "I'm a Baptist and I'll die a Baptist." And so I said to her, I said, "I'm just going to close my Bible, and I'm not going to discuss it with you anymore." My wife's mother came to stay with us for a while, to visit with us a week or so. And me working the third shift, this morning that I got in from work, I went on to bed, and I could hear them talking in the kitchen. And my wife's mother was not in favor of what I had done, that I had left the Baptist church and had obeyed the gospel, come into the Lord's church. And she was putting the church down. And I could hear what was being said, and I was listening carefully, because my wife said, "Well, I've checked what they teach in the Bible," and she said, "They give you book, chapter, and verse for what they're teaching." She said, "They're teaching the Bible." And so I turned over and went to sleep, because I felt like we had her. Now, in December, after that event, and I don't know what month that was that took place, my wife came to me, and I had not said a word to her about it. She came to me and she said, "Would you think I was crazy if I asked you to take me over to the South Commerce Street Church building and baptize me for the remission of sins?" And I said, "No, I wouldn't think you're crazy." And so I brought her over here to this baptistry in this building, and she was the first person that I baptized after I obeyed the gospel myself. So I baptized her. I had been invited to preach at the Lyerly Church building long about that time, and then following that at Broome, Alabama, I preached for them, and was doing this on a regular basis. And my wife, of course, she has supported me in the work. And my first full-time work that I did was at Fairhope, Alabama. I moved down there and began to work with the church in that area. And from there, I've been preaching the gospel ever since. The Lord has been good to us. I'm thankful for the things that the Lord has done. We have a family that's all connected to the Lord's church. My children are all members of the church. I have 4 boys and 1 girl. And our boys are all preachers. And our children, all of them that are old enough, are members of the Lord's church. And our great-grandchildren, some of them are members of the church. And some of our grandchildren, our grandsons, are deacons in the church. So I feel like the Lord has blessed me very much. Well, Jesus said, "I will build my church." Now, that's just as plain as can be. When Christ said, "I will build my church," he's talking about ownership. This is my church I'm going to build. I will build my church. He did not say, "I will build a Baptist church or a Methodist church." I will build my church. And he says, "The gates of hell shall not prevail against it." And another thought, the Apostle Paul said, "I bow my knees to the Father, our Lord Jesus Christ, of whom the whole family in heaven and earth is named." Now that's pretty powerful, is it not? How could anybody on the face of the earth go around and think, well, I can be a part of something other than what the Bible teaches? We're teaching what the Bible teaches. Does that answer your question?